What's up, everyone? Thanks for joining us for another exciting episode of the 11:11 podcast. I'm your host, Matthew.
I'm Simone.
And I'm Donnie.
And we are the T10 Collective. And we have a really exciting episode for y'all. I'm really looking forward to talking to this brother right here, Chris Mfume. Chris, you want to give a quick introduction of who you are?
Sure. I'm Chris Mfume. I'm a local entrepreneur. I'm focused in the real estate space, in real estate development. And our company builds housing and community-based projects in emerging neighborhoods.
Nice.
There's a lot that we're going to go into about what that actually means. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. But just to start us out, Chris, like, what does it even mean to be a developer? I think a lot of folks may have heard the term, but may not necessarily even know what that really means. So can you just kind of give like that explanation of what that is?
Right. So there's a couple analogies I would use. One of which is like a conductor in an orchestra. So we don't play any specific instrument, but we tell each instrument when to play. Another one is similar to like a director in a movie or executive producer in a movie. So we put together the correct pieces, we think of a vision, and then we try to bring that vision to life. So essentially, our role is to bring a real estate project on time and on budget to fruition.
That's really cool. Okay, that's a very concise definition, and I think it gives a little bit more vision into what it means in the broader real estate scheme. But who are some of the people that you play with? Like, what are some of the people that are involved in a project that maybe folks may not realize are a part of it?
Right. So I think the best part of the business is that you get to talk to so many different types of people. So I deal a ton with lawyers, engineers, architects, community members, government officials, city council members, stuff like that. And so you really get to talk to different types of people at all different types of the day, including like contractors. So one day I have a shout-out match with the contractor. The next I'll go and I'll talk to the bank. And I have a suit on asking for money, you know. Another day I'm in work boots, checking out something on site, making sure that the light is where it needs to be or something like that, you know. So it's a little bit of everything, which is what I really like.
Sounds like no 2 days are alike.
No 2 days are alike. Like the other day I get a call in the middle of the morning and they tell me to come to one of the properties and the whole first floor is basically underwater. And that's like a common thing, you know. That's just the stuff that comes along with the business. So
You got to be prepared for the unpredictable.
Yeah, the beauty of entrepreneurship, every day being different. So kind of give us the lay of the land. So if somebody wants to work with you, what are some of those like first steps that they do to kind of start their partnership with you?
Right. So the first thing I'm looking for is honestly hustle and persistence. Like that was how I got into the business. That was a big thing. There really is no set way to get into real estate development. People take a ton of different paths. So I've seen people be attorneys first. I've seen people work in brokerage. And then another common one is just somebody who made money doing something else who wants to buy real estate now and has become a developer, right? And so there's no like set pathway. But the biggest thing I could say is to be persistent and just keep showing up. Like that's a theme of my career. That's a theme of really just being successful in this business because it comes with a ton of ups and downs and you got to have that staying power.
Okay, so you talk about hustle. Kind of walk us through how you got interested in real estate development in the first place and kind of what was your path?
Sure. So I graduated from Wake Forest in North Carolina, and right after that I moved to D.C. And I was working in the Navy Yard at USDOT, and I could look out the window, and that was when the neighborhood was really, there was nothing there. It was just kind of like warehouse space, really dilapidated, not really taken care of. And that's when they first started redeveloping it now. And if you go to the Navy Yard now, I mean, it's boom.
Oh, yeah.
It's thriving, ton of restaurants, shops, condos, apartments, everything out there. You know, it's a great waterfront neighborhood. But I really got to see this from the start. And living in D.C., over a decade ago now, and just seeing how D.C. was changing. You know, I walk 14th Street, and, you know, 6 months later, you see a building pop up, and I'm like, wow, this used to just be like a little McDonald's. I'm talking about the corner of 14th and U, you know. It was just a little McDonald's right there. All of a sudden, you got this big building over it. And I immediately, you know, wanted to get into that. I started talking to as many people as possible, trying to get more information on the business. And honestly, the response wasn't strong. I mean, it was a lot of like, you know, you need 10 years of experience. You got to do this. You got to do that. But I tried to stay persistent, so I ended up going to as many real estate events as possible. Eventually met my future boss at one, and I just started chasing him around. So he was going to events. I showed up to 12 of them over 7 months, right? Wow. He had like hearings with the city trying to, get some tax incentives passed through. And I would just show up to every single one. And the hearing would last like 2 hours. And I'd just sit there, wouldn't get a chance to talk to him until the very end. And I'd shake his hand at the end and say, really great job today. Like, really enjoyed this. Is there anything I could do to help? And at the same time, I just went and sharpened my skills. And eventually he said I wasn't going to leave him alone. I said, nope. He said, all right, I'll give you a job.
Persistence, it pays off. Yeah. So it sounds like it's more of, if anything, at least starting out, and you got to have that spirit of hustle. You got to be a go-getter no matter what in order to actually make something. Is that true?
For sure, because there is no like set book on how to do it. Like every problem is unique. Like that pipe burst was the first time I ever dealt with one of those. Like I never dealt with that. Stuff happens all the time. You could have a guy working with you get hurt on site. What do you do then? You could have somebody break into one of your buildings. Like that type of stuff happens. So there's all different types of issues, and you gotta have that persistence because that allows you to see those issues through and get resolution.
And that's a fair point, because I think oftentimes entrepreneurs are dealt with challenges for the first time often.
Yes.
So for you, as you're approaching those things, as you're beginning to familiarize yourself with an industry you're not aware of, how are you building your knowledge base? How are you finding resources and information so you're able to deliver?
For sure. That's a great question. So, YouTube University that's at the top of the list. I think like it's a unique time in history where like there's a lot of barriers to getting knowledge have been removed, right? And so a lot of excuses have been removed too. So like you could look up, if you want to be an electrician, right? I guarantee you can go on YouTube right now. And I've never searched it, but I guarantee you can, and you can find out a good amount about it. So that's number one. Podcasts. Okay. Another great resource. I mean, I watch everybody's podcast. Like, I was meeting somebody who I admired in business earlier this week. This woman, Marianne Gilmartin, who worked in the Barclays Center, right? And when I met her, I rattled off her whole career, right? Because I had already watched all her podcasts. I already did all these things, right? So a lot of that, and then just talking to, approaching. If you admire somebody, I approach them, and can I go grab a coffee with you? Can I just talk with you a little bit about your career and your experience in business? And that's kind of just how things are snowballed.
Okay.
Is that who you always have been? Like even as a kid, you were that person who kind of had your ideas in mind, and you were just always committed to going after it? Like who was young Chris?
Young Chris was pretty laid back. I would say that like business is something that I've always kind of just been into. Like since I was 11, like I wanted to be an entrepreneur. Like, and I thought it would have been in something else. I didn't know it was gonna be real estate development, but I've just always been about owning your own business and going out on your own. Just because, I ended up going to a nice high school in my area, right? And that completely like changed like my prism of like how like I viewed things. So I used to think like what I thought was a big house, I started to realize wasn't really a big house, right? And then I went to like a real big house, and then I went to like somebody's house where they had a garage with lifts. They had cars on lifts. I'm like, what is this? I'm like, this is different, I didn't even know that stuff existed. Like my world was so much smaller, and that's when I started to realize like this world is big. There's more out there to see. So,
wow,
yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, exposure is everything, right? And it sounds like from your experience, even that exposure in DC got you that interest in real estate. I'm interested, when you were in school, what were you studying? What were you interested in as you were in school and as you were exiting school? Kind of what was your career path at that point?
Sure. So I was studying political science at that point.
Okay.
Which, I used to say has nothing to do with what I'm doing now, but I start to realize it does. Understanding how government works and functions. Last week, I spoke at a city council hearing, spoke up for affordable housing. Like, it's just, I didn't realize that these things connected until honestly somebody told me like, yeah, you are like applying that. So I did political science, tried to understand how governments work. And so it started to pay dividends. Not necessarily the beginning of my career, right? Because I was just behind the scenes trying to do whatever I could to learn. But now it's starting to actually pay dividends.
Yeah, it's interesting how the lessons learned in different parts of your life matriculate to like the opportunities you're in as an adult. But affordable housing is definitely an interesting topic because I do think it's a great vehicle to uplift people out of poverty. Could you maybe talk a little about your position on that, your thoughts on that, or anything like that?
Yeah, so right now in the U.S., there's about 45 million renters, right? And over half of those are rent burdened, right? Which would mean they're paying over 30% of their pre-tax income on rent. That officially means that we're in a housing crisis. When people who are employed, working a good job, cannot afford the basics of housing, we've got a problem, right? Things have become out of whack. Wages aren't catching up to where they need to be so that people can afford to live reasonably. And so I'm really passionate about the affordable housing space for a couple of reasons. One, everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people in it look like me, right? And so like I know I'm serving my community. Number two, I think that it's a great business, but it's doing well while doing good is something that I'm really passionate about. Like, and having an impact-based company is super important to me, right? Like, it's like double bottom line. It's super gratifying to run a great business, to serve communities that look like you, and it just help people in general, man. Like, that's just it's a better way to do it, and you sleep better at night. It's just, a better way to operate for me. So
I hear you completely. I think we can all attest mission-driven initiatives. I think there is something we can, our generation in particular, we're trying to challenge too, is that, as you said it, you can do good for people while doing good for yourself. So it's motivating, inspiring to hear that as a direction. As you're looking into this affordable housing landscape, I know there's a lot of factors, even demographically, in different regions, it's different. As you're approaching that, what are some of the initial steps you're taking? Are there even any projects underway that you could talk about, or kind of are you still in the initial stages of that?
Yeah, sure. So we've got a couple different levels of affordable housing. So we have what you would call naturally occurring affordable housing, which is not subsidized. Like, there is no government program subsidizing it, but we are building in neighborhoods at a price that is affordable to the normal renter. So we have apartments in Baltimore as low as $1,000 a month, right? And these are brand new construction, nice places to live, safe outside, that type of situation. And that was really because I had some guys who really thought long term. Two of the first guys to invest in me are two African American investors from Baltimore who really wanted to give back. And so what they're doing is basically bought a whole block on this place called historic Howard Street, which really hasn't been the same after the riots, after the Dr. King riots, right? And so it's basically been vacant until then. And so we bought up a block, and we've started like block by block, starting to redevelop it. So we just delivered like 55 apartments there. We got probably another 200 coming after that we're working on. And they're just thinking long term. And without them, that project wouldn't happen. Like, if I had to go out to the capital markets and raise money for it, there's just no way you can get somebody on board for that. Right. And so it takes people like that stepping up. That's one of them. Another one, which is a little bit different, this is what I would call capital A affordable, because it's using tax credits, is here in D.C. So that's over in Anacostia. It's an historic Anacostia Ward 8. And what we're trying to do over there is create 70 affordable housing units, anywhere from 30% AMI to 80% AMI. And we have a wide range of incomes in there because the neighborhood is also trying to grow. So they have a lot of affordable housing, believe it or not, and they're looking to actually grow out of that and grow with some more market rate tenants too. So what we did is what's called a mixed income building. So it's not strictly affordable. We're still going to serve those residents. We have the 30%. We have the permanent supportive housing, but we also get all the way up to 80% so that we're starting to stretch the incomes there and create a bridge for, residents in D.C.
No, I love that.
Wow. And I want to go back to something that you mentioned before. You said that two of your early investors are brothers, are people who look like you. Is that something that you think is starting to become more prevalent, or what is like the demographic makeup? I'm assuming probably not favorable towards blacks, but what does that actually look like in that industry? Yeah,
so honestly, that's the only example I got, and that's what's crazy. So but for them investing in me, like there's no way my company would exist, right? Because it is it's the real estate in general can be risky, but this is the riskiest form of real estate, right? We're talking about ground up. It takes 2 years just to get a building out of the ground. Like there's so many things that can go wrong over time. And so, but for those two saying, hey, look, I'm going to come and I'm going to invest in you, like this would have happened. And that's already paid dividends because I've got a young guy that's like 27 who we just bought a building with, right? He didn't have the balance sheet or the experience to get the investors for it. So we came and lended our name and said, hey, look, we'll buy this with you. So now he's buying commercial properties. And I'm hoping he goes and does the same thing and it keeps, continuing on. So there aren't like a lot of examples of that, but I do think it's happening now. I think it's finally starting to happen.
That's dope to hear. And I think, the fact that you are not only reaching forward, but pulling back is a great example of the types of things that entrepreneurs should hopefully be doing. But it's something that brings up the next generation of folks who may listen to this podcast episode and be like, wow, I didn't even know a career as a developer was a thing, but now I know a path, hearing your path. But talk to us about those early days when I'm sure it was tough, when, you maybe didn't get that cosign yet, or you first got that cosign, but you still had to do the work. What did that even look like for you? Because you sounded like you were a fish out of water starting out. What was that experience about?
Yeah, so to be 1,000 with you, like I thought it was going to take a year. Like I'm going to go and I'm going to start this company. I'm going to do it for a year, and after a year we lit. Like it's happening. We're all good. It took 5. Like really, like before like we started feeling okay, like, oh, the company's definitely going to be here next year. It took 5. Like it's been very recent for that to happen. And I'm glad that I didn't know that because, I might not have did it if I knew it was going to take 5, like I'm glad it happened the way that it did. So like those first days were tough because, you got to figure out how to eat. And again, having people around you that care about you was important. I mean, we had to get creative. Like at one point it's like, look, can you advance my fees? I know my fees don't come for like another year, but like, can you help me out? Like, I just got to be able to eat. Like, I got to be able to pay my rent, all this type of stuff. And when you have people that are invested in you that like believe in your future, they'll do stuff like that, right? And so that's why I say without those two, like definitely wouldn't be standing today.
So what advice would you give the younger you, right? Those times when you were reaching out to investors, you weren't necessarily getting the answers you were looking for, or you just didn't know where to turn next. What advice would you give that person who's looking to do what you're doing now?
Yeah, I think you just got to keep the faith. I mean, if you do the right thing over and over again and you're relentless with it, I really do think you're going to win. And that's played out for me several times. Like, especially if you want to be an entrepreneur, like, first of all, you got to know what you're signing up for. So when I signed up for it, I have read so many books on entrepreneurs and stuff like that, that when big challenges came up, I was expecting it. I may not have known exactly what it was going to look like, but I was never like too surprised. Whereas like I tell like my mom and she's like shook. She's like, I can't believe it. It's like, what are you going to do? Like,
it's not the traditional type of
go do this instead. Like here, I talked to my friend, like he's got this for you, like go work over here, that type of deal.
Right.
And she meant well, but it's just a different path. And so, you just gotta keep the faith and keep doing the right thing. And sometimes you gotta step without seeing the next step ahead of you, which is a little bit crazy. But if you keep the faith, and just keep working, it tends to work out.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, you've been in business how long now? About 7 years, you said?
It's about to be 6. It'll be 6 in January.
Wow, congratulations. I mean, even just making it past 1 is a big deal, with the fact that you're still doing it 6, hitting your stride. When were those moments where you started to see the work actually start to pay dividend, where you're like, all right, I know year 5 it started to get better, but at least after year 1, you were like, okay, I might be onto something if I keep doing another year and another year. Like, when was it that you had that moment where the light bulb kind of went off for you?
I think one of those moments was definitely our first, like, what I would call large project, which was like 150 units. And that was one. So prior to that, I had investors that had bought me opportunities, and I would basically take the opportunity and project manage it day to day, right? And so they would find a piece of land. They needed somebody to develop it. I would go and I'd run the process from start to finish. But that isn't the same as sourcing your own deal, finding your own financing, and all that type of stuff. So the first one that I did from scratch, where like literally I found a piece of land, I thought of a vision, I had to go find investors, brand new investors that weren't any of the people that I mentioned before, find a bank, all this type of stuff, and hire a contractor, hire an architect, and get it done. That was the first time I was like, okay, like I can do this. And that, at that point, like I now have that. It stays with you. It's part of your resume now. So I can take that and say, hey, look what I've done. Would you trust me to do this, or would you invest in this project? And, you know, it snowballs from there.
Yeah. Wow. And then, you know, on top of that, the fact that you're doing it by yourself, you know, you don't have a business partner. Is that rare, or is that a common thing that people starting out and do it on their own?
Yeah. So the best advice I would give you is get a partner. Like that's like the, you know, we're in the market for one now. We're looking for it. Having partners with you, I think, is super, super valuable. Like it's cool to do it alone, but it's much better to have people rowing with you, man. People singing from the same sheet of music. There's just so many special things that can happen when you do that. So if I could do it all over again, I probably would have had a partner from the beginning, but now we're still working towards that. Another thing, like even though I don't have a partner per se in my company, like partnerships have been really the core of like what we do. Every single thing, like we partner up with another developer, and maybe I'm able to use their accounting department, right? So that helps me not have to have the accounting overhead. Or a lot of times, like when I do a big project, there's guarantees, right? So there's loan guarantees. So if I'm doing, let's call it $30-50 million, something like that, there's a big loan that comes with that size project, and the bank wants to know that you can pay it back. And if you can't pay it back yourself, you have to find somebody that can pay it back to go along with you and sign it, basically saying they're going to complete this, or else you can take all my stuff, right? And so those are the type of partnerships that have been able to get me through, because I can't guarantee that, right? You know, so
it sounds like it's all about risk. It's risk tolerance.
Lot of risk. It's on your back every day for sure.
Oh man, do you feel that it's something that's kind of like a cloud always over you because you know there's so much that you have to deal with, or like what are some of the ways that you actually deal with that, if so?
Yeah, man. I think it ebbs and flows. Some days, you know, it's all good, it's all beautiful. It's just like entrepreneurship in general, you know. Some days it's all beautiful, you know. We lit, like we good, like everything's good. And other days it's like, damn, like this ain't going quite like how I thought it would, right? And so it's just dealing with those ups and downs and getting used to that too. Knowing like whenever I have a bad day now, like I know, I'm like, you know, it's just one of those days. Like that's just how it's gonna go sometimes. So eventually you start getting more comfortable with the risk, you know.
Yeah, and it's, as entrepreneurs, we all can relate to that. It seems like that's a common theme, that you got to be able to operate at this kind of even pace, regardless of how high or how low things are, regardless if you're a developer, regardless if you're a content creator, whatever your industry is. That's a big thing as entrepreneurs, that you just have to be able to sustain.
Right.
That's the only way you're going to make it.
And you said you've known you wanted to be an entrepreneur since you were 11. So from being that young, how has your mind, I guess, towards entrepreneurship, or your thoughts towards entrepreneurship changed and evolved over time?
Yeah, so, you know, the 11 thing happened, and I didn't realize it was happening, but my dad used to put, like, Black Enterprise magazine. He used to just set it on the counter.
Representation.
And he used to give it to me all the time, and I remember looking it up, and I would immediately go to, like, the top companies. They always had, like, a BE 100, right, top companies. And I'd see a couple people. I'd see Tom Moorhead, who had car dealerships. So that was like one of my first dreams. I'm like, I'm gonna get a car. Like I really like, you know, I was super, super into cars, any type of sports car, anything like that. I'm like, how can you afford one of those? Okay, can I go work here and afford one? No. And then I couldn't find a job where I could afford one, and that's where the entrepreneurship came from. Like, all right, like that's how I afford one of these. All right, cool. I'm gonna go do that. And so Tom Moorhead, and then the second one was Don Peoples, who was the biggest black real estate developer in the country. Or like, he's doing the largest projects, one of the tallest buildings in LA, $3 billion tower in New York, Affirmation Tower. A lot of really cool things. And so those are some things that I saw early on that helped inform my journey.
Did you have any people in your family that you knew of that had their own business? I know you mentioned your dad used to put out the magazines, but was entrepreneurship something that you saw an uncle, a cousin, someone was like, okay, they're at least doing something that is theirs?
Honestly, no. Nobody I knew directly really was an entrepreneur. And I found out later on. So my grandfather was a school principal. He worked in education his whole life, right? And I found out on the side that like he was doing entrepreneurial things like later in life. Like my grandfather, I joke and say like he maybe said like 600 words to me like over like the course of my life. Like he's just like super quiet and stoic, but like when he spoke, like you listen, right? That type of situation. And so, and he wasn't into self-promotion at all, so he never talked about what he did, right? So I didn't know that he was doing entrepreneurial things. He was doing real estate stuff. Even when I got into real estate, he didn't tell me that he was in real estate at all, which is like interesting. That says a lot like about his generation. He never mentioned, even after I was doing stuff, never mentioned it to me. And so, he would be the only example, but he never let me know. I kind of wish he did. You know, I would have known that was in it, that was in me, but no, nobody I knew when I was younger.
Yeah, to that point, though, because there is a certain set of intangibles, skill sets to be an entrepreneur. Do you feel like you were kind of born with some of them, or were there also skills you maybe acquired over time? What do you think that split is?
Yeah, you know, I think I've acquired some skills out of necessity. So a big thing for mine is reading about other entrepreneurs. Like that's been a huge part of it. That's kind of been my North Star. That's how like even though I'm experiencing something for the first time, I've seen it before, right? Because I read it and I read how this person dealt with it. And so all of a sudden, like I've got the experience of somebody that has done way more than me, right? And so that's been helpful. And just kind of navigate. And then other things like creating relationships with people is something that I've just always done that happened to be helpful in this side of the business as well. So
that makes sense.
Wow, I think you touched on something that's really important too. The fact that people can be your heroes from afar, and they don't even know that they're influencing you and impacting you. Who are some other people outside? You said Don people, some of those people. Who are those people that are happening now that you're watching their trajectory really closely because you know that either they're doing something that you want to do or they're inspiring you in a way where it's like, wow, I want to see where they go with that?
That's a great question. So, I mean, it's still a lot of those same people. So Don is one, right? He's doing great things. He's doing stuff in New York and LA, and I'm following that. I'm reading up. I have friends that are doing cool stuff, right? Like I have B-Rule is a good one. So B-Rule is doing a lot of affordable housing development. Like I'm watching him. He's out in Atlanta. He's moving around. He's making moves. So I'm watching him. Anybody that's like a counterpart, like whether I may be more experienced in a career or not, like even some of my young boys, I'm like, oh, I see how you structured that. You know, like, oh, I learned a little something here. I learned from everybody I talk to, whether or not they're in real estate, or not. Like I'm learning something from you, and I'm watching how you're moving and all that type of stuff. Like I'm constantly just paying attention, I would say. So there's a ton of people that are inspiring me, and you touched on something important, which is like a lot of people. Reginald Lewis, he was one of the first black billionaires, and he was from Baltimore, right? And he started by taking this company called Beatrice Foods public, and I never met him, right? Like he passed a while ago, but like he's a mentor of mine without knowing it, because I was able to read his books and say, okay, this is how he structured it and put all these things together. And eventually, like, if you read enough of these, things start connecting. There's like a web of things, and you start seeing like certain themes of like persistence. Like I keep mentioning that, like persistence and grit. Like it's a theme in every single one of these successful people. Right. So I just take that and I keep running with it.
Right. What would you say is your process? Like, how do you approach, if every day is not the same, what are the things that are consistent in how you approach your day-to-day work? Especially since you don't have an accountability partner.
Yeah, so what you try to do is get in a routine, right? So like I wake up, work out, drink some water, answer emails, get the day going. Like you try to keep that routine going, and that kind of keeps you on focus. I'm honestly starting to develop new processes. So we just started hiring people, right? Yeah. And so figuring out how to delegate tasks is like something that's like brand new for me, but like it's like a light bulb has now went off. Like I see the benefit of it. Like it's so much more helpful because I'm just so used to doing everything by myself, right?
Efficiency.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so much more efficient. And like I could see how this adds leverage to my business where like I feel like we could do 10 times more. So I'm looking to, get some more people in here so like we can all, work together towards a common goal,
Yeah. And that's a great point because entrepreneurship eventually, it includes management, but it evolves to management as well. So now you're in the space now where you're scaling. What are some of the new skills that you're beginning to develop? Because, even personally, I thought you just had to be nice to be a good manager, but it's not enough.
Sure.
So there has to be process, structure, delegation, goal setting, vision. What are some of the things you're learning as you're now building team?
Yeah, so what I'm learning is that it's important for me, one, to even track what I'm doing and understanding what I need to do specifically and what would be better served for somebody else. And so even with, I have a young guy that just started with us, and it's like, oh, it's better for him to run this process, and it's better for me because he needs to learn this, right?
Yeah.
He needs to be able to take charge of this and learn this, and I need to get this off my plate. And so there's a lot of synergy there that I'm learning. So I'm now starting to write down, oh, here's what I did at 8 o'clock. Here's what I did at 9 o'clock, and just write down my day and say, all right, these are my tasks that I'm doing. Which one of these needs me specifically, and which one of these can I delegate to somebody else? So that's been super helpful, and just, giving people the autonomy to, whenever I'm in a meeting, I'm letting him do a lot of the talking, there's a lot of that, trying to hand stuff off to him and have him grow and have that professional development at the same time, I think is just as important. So
That's awesome.
And then also in terms of the next step, you're already starting to kind of lay the foundation where you're scaling up not only your business but opportunities. What's something that's on your North Star that you think, okay, when I get here, I know I'm maybe in a different league than I am right now?
yeah, so it's interesting. I feel like it's just now really starting to pick up a lot of traction, which is exciting. And so we're getting asked to do like something that's completely unique, because we're doing a big speaking engagement here this week, right? Like a whole East Coast conference. And so we're starting to get that recognition and that exposure, which has been awesome. So that's something that we're doing a lot of that. We're on the speaking circuit. We're doing podcasts and stuff like that. And it's really rewarding to see that, especially after, the years that we've put in, And there's a lag between when like you think like you're doing it and when like it actually starts happening, right? And so like years ago I was like, all right, like we're finally there and all that, and it just didn't, wasn't quite there. But now like I'm really starting to feel, okay, we've got the momentum, and now we can go and we can strive higher. We can do bigger stuff, we can hire more people, and that's always a gratifying feeling.
Tell us that story of when you had that welcome to the big leagues moment where you were like, okay, I'm in a whole different type of category now of just maybe you're unfamiliar, but it was uncharted territory that you obviously stepped into, and you were like, okay, now like this is serious.
Right.
Yeah. And then how also were you growing your business, like as far as marketing? Was it word of mouth where people just, kind of putting your name in rooms before you even knew it? Like how did that work as well?
Yeah, so I'll touch on the marketing one first. So that one is interesting because I had like a light bulb go off probably like 3-4 months ago. And, we were competing for opportunities. There were a lot of loan funds, grant funds, all types of stuff, really targeted at young, diverse entrepreneurs. Right, a ton of them, and we would submit for them, and like we would just lose, and we just get, we lost once. I'm like, all right, cool, I understand a lot of competitive people here, and then we lost again. I'm like, all right, well that's interesting, like I thought, we put together a good application, we showed ourselves well and all that. Then we lost a third time, and I'm like, all right, what's going on here? Why are we not gaining any traction? And then I had to like change my mindset. I sat down. I'm like, yo, you're your whole marketing department. Like, and I'm not talking to anybody about it, right? Because I had gotten advice from a lot of the older guys. They're like, just stay under the radar. Like, don't do anything. They're like, don't shake the boat. Like, you don't want any of these problems. And so like, I had been so quiet, just kind of like scared of like that, like, you know, like, is that going to attract the attention? I don't want. And so, but I had to realize, you know, if I'm not paying anybody to do marketing, I'm the marketing department.
Gotta do something.
Right. And so now I've started putting information out there about stuff that we're doing. And it's working. You know, people are responding positively to it. And so that was a big mindset shift for me, where I had to say, okay, look, you're the whole deal here. You know, like, until you farm that out to somebody, you know, you hire somebody full time to do that. You're the marketing department, and this is also important to growing your business. I didn't know that was. I don't sell a product per se, right? And so I didn't think that like it was as important to me. I'm not selling shampoo, you know, like there's nothing, there's no specific product that like I have to get word out there for, but like, I guess I am the product. Business is the product. Yeah. And so I need to get the word out there as much as possible. And so I'm doing a lot of that, and we've gotten good responses. And then to your question, Fresh, is like, I think as a result of these marketing efforts, like I'm getting asked to do more stuff. That speaking engagement is a great example. You know, like
that's amazing.
We're doing a lot of them now. So we got a whole bunch of them on the books. We got a calendar full of them now, which is awesome. And that's like there's nothing like being recognized by your peers.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing like the people that like understand, because there's so many like little nuances in whatever business you're in. There's little nuances that only somebody in your business will appreciate, right? And so like to see like the people in my business whose work I admire and respect, you know, invite me to these things and consider it worthwhile to hear what I got to say, like that means a lot to me. So
that's dope. That's awesome. And then one last question on I guess the future for you. What is it that people should be on the lookout for you? How are they going to find out about you outside of your marketing? What are projects, if you could speak on them, things that they should be aware of that you have your hands in?
Sure.
Whatever you could share.
Sure. So, I mean, the biggest thing that when people think of me and they think of CLD, like I want them to think of impact, right? And so, like, we're going to do the waterfront developments. We're going to do the sexy stuff because, like, I don't want to get put in a box. Sometimes people get put in a box. Like, they like, okay, black developers can only do affordable housing over here, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas when you look at the big companies like related companies that did Hudson Yards, right? Mm-hmm. Biggest real estate development in the country, biggest real estate development probably in the world, right? And the backbone of their business is actually affordable housing, right? And so nobody put them in a box, right? And they're doing business all over. They're doing business nationwide. They're doing business internationally, right? And so, like, I'm very adamant about, like, affordable housing, one, will be the core of our business, right? It'll always be the backbone of our business. But we can compete with you on the waterfront, too. Like, we can go do the high rise there as well. We want to serve everybody from all housing levels. And I think, like, that's important, not having to put a product here because that's what we specialize in. I'm going to put what's best for the neighborhood. So if the neighborhood needs more of this, I'm going to put that. If the neighborhood needs more affordable housing, I'm going to put more affordable housing. And, like, that's super important. So when you think of us, I want you to be able to think of impact, one, and then two, high quality work. You know, we don't do it second to any. We're not just a black company, right? We're doing work just as good as anybody out there, right? And we can compete on any playing field. And I think that's important.
I want you to say that again, like to the camera.
Right? Yeah. Look at them at home and tell them exactly what you just said, because I think you do need to repeat that one again, because that's important.
Sure. So I think that when I want people to think of us, one, they need to think of impact. It's important that you understand that there's a purpose behind what we do, beyond just profit. And then number two, that, you know, we compete. Don't put us in a box. We can compete anywhere. You know, when I look at some of these other companies, you know, they're nationwide. Why can't we go nationwide? Why can't we build on a waterfront? And then why can't we also do affordable housing in a neighborhood that really needs it? I see us as being the premier housing company that competes with not just my African-American peers, which we need more of anyway, right? I'm completely on board with that. But I want you to be able to put us in a room with anybody, and know that we're going to compete, that our product is going to be second to none, and that you're going to get a great service when you hire us to come do work for you. So
I love that.
I love that. I love that. All right, before we get you out of here, Chris, we got our game. Simone, you wanna walk them through this?
So this is what we call culture questions. So you're just going to pick something out of here, and it will be a random question, and we'll just get your answer. Here you go. I should let you shake it.
all right, let's see. All right, here we go. Okay. Oh. What do you want your legacy to be?
Perfect.
This is a good one. So, that's a great question. Daily, I try to say affirmations, right? To reinforce not only what I believe, but what I want to believe and what I want to happen. And one of those affirmations is that, you know, it starts out with being able to provide for my family, right? Like that's number one. Like, I want to make sure that by the time I'm gone, my family's good forever, right? Like, they'll remember me. They'll talk about, you know, Grandpa Chris and like what he did and how that made dividends for us, and that's why we live in this area and we go to these schools and everybody's well off, right? Because I still have a lot of people in my family that don't. I'm really the only one in my family that lives like this, right? And like, I've been super privileged with that because I've gotten opportunities that a lot of them haven't gotten, and we all have the same blood. We're all the same, and that really shows. Like, it's all about your opportunities, right? Because we're the exact same. We grew up together as kids, you know, and so I know they have the same aptitude. You know, we got the same brain power, same all that stuff. But my life has went radically different because of basically like God putting his hands on me and just, you know, pushing me forward and nudging me in certain directions. So number one, changing the legacy for my family, like that's super important. And then number two, changing the legacy for my people. Like, that's been a huge like part of it. That's the last part of my affirmations. Like, it goes something like, you know, I'm going to change things so much people are going to like wonder how I did it. You know, like it's that type of situation. I'm going to change the path of my people so drastically that people are going to wonder how I did it. And I think that it's super important to be intentional. So I tell my friends, and I have obviously colleagues that don't look like me too, you know, let's be clear. I've had a ton of white people take interest in me, help me out a ton.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and there's a ton that have helped me get here as well, that have been allies. And I have candid conversations with them, and I say, look, when I look at household net worth and household income, we're lagging so far behind right now that's where my focus is. And, you know, one day I got into it with somebody because he's like, well, like, isn't that kind of like reverse racism type of deal, you know, that type of situation? I said, no, like, look at where incomes are right now. And I said, are you going to focus on that? Okay, well, if you're not going to focus on that, that's what I need to be specifically focused on, trying to grow this, right? And so I think that in order for America to thrive, like, all the people in America need to thrive, right? And so we're not getting the best productivity out of large swaths of our population because we're not educating the way that we need to. We're not doing the things that we need to do. So in order for us to be competitive at large scale, we got to figure this out. And so I'm hyper focused on like that, on education. You know, we donate to a lot of educational, the UMB Cura Scholars, shout out to them. We're doing a capital campaign right now, raising money to get young kids in STEM education. You know, I do mentorship programs, you know, like all these things are super important. And I think just we're like in the midst of what I would call like the second civil rights movement, right? And like the first one was like equality, like in terms of laws and stuff like that. Like number two is economic equality, right? And I feel like that will fix a lot of the ills in our community. I don't think we're dealing with the same thing we dealt with in the 60s, whereas people like, we just don't want black people to win. We don't want to do that. Like, sure, that exists. There's some people like that, but I think it's just the system is set up in such a way that like you need money to
Right.
be able to operate in America.
Yeah.
Right.
That's just real talk. So the
fact.
more money and more influence we get, I think the better our situation will be. The less we'll have to worry about kids and police. Like, you know, like when you can call the commissioner and, you know, and make stuff happen, you can call City Hall, like, you know, your neighborhoods get policed a little bit better,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like
Right.
it's
It's
a
all
little
the
bit
trickle down
different.
from
Money
that one
talks.
thing.
It talks, and I learned that that's what everybody respects. And so using my resources in a way to make the situation better for people who look like me is something that's important. So
I love that. I love that.
For
Chris,
sure.
this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I learned a lot. You dropped a lot of gems, not only about what you do, but the things that we may not realize that are happening around us that have the type of impact that we hope you were just talking about. Any last words, Chris? Anything you want people to know on the way out?
Or where can people find you?
Sure.
Good one. That's a good one.
Sure, yeah. So you can find me on Instagram. My personal Instagram is at Mfume. That's a tough one, so I'll give it to you. It's C, M as in Mary, F as in Frank, U as in umbrella, M as in Mary, E as in Edward, C Mfume. And you could also follow me on TikTok and LinkedIn and all the other platforms like that. And just thank you guys. Thank you for the time. Thank you for highlighting entrepreneurs, man. That's important stuff. The more you see, you know, the big difference representation makes. You know, it's the same way it's the Black enterprise for me. Like somebody may see this,
No, for
100%.
sure.
you know, or another one of your episodes and
100%.
find out what they want to do with their life. So
For
I
sure.
think that's
Super
important.
kudos to you for even being in this space, because we know that the real estate development space isn't filled with a lot of people who look like us. So you are definitely doing your part to change the trajectory.
Yeah, and one thing I noticed is throughout the conversation, you said we a lot. So it's indicative to the type of leader you are and the type of person you are. So shout out to you.
Absolutely, man. Thanks again, Chris. And that is a wrap. We'll see you next time on 1111 Podcast. Thanks for listening.